Let's talk about conflict. In your books it says that Arthur Wellesley, the Duke of Wellington, had a famous quote. His quote was, "Next to a battle lost, there is nothing so dreadful as a battle won." Now there's another famous quote by Voltaire, if you're familiar with Voltaire. Voltaire says, "I only lost but twice in life, once when I won a lawsuit and once when I lost a lawsuit." So anytime a lawsuit, if you can't get it resolved before the lawsuit is filed, or at least if you can't get it resolved before it actually goes to court, then in many people's opinion, you've lost. You've lost because you've lost the opportunity to be part of the decision-making process. Because once it's out of the mediation realm and goes to court, it's out of your hands. Because you are no longer part of the decision-making process. A judge is going to be, or a jury is going to be part of that decision-making process. You won't be. And so one of the primary advantages of being a mediator and going to mediation is that you're allowing people to be part of the process. You're allowing people to have a part in the decision-making of what's going to happen in this issue and what's going to happen in the future and what's going to happen with the rest of their lives. Talking about the nature of conflict, basically conflict arises when one or more participants view the current system as not working. At least one party is sufficiently satisfied with the status quo that they are willing to try and influence the situation to arrive at an improved condition. Conflict may be viewed as a process to put ourselves through to achieve a new condition and new self-definition. What I look at conflict is, I look at conflict as an opportunity. I look at conflict resolution as an opportunity for us to be involved in resolving our own issues, to be a part of the resolution process. Conflict should be recognized as existing at two levels. One, the interpersonal level, and the other at the intrapersonal level. There typically exists some measure of interpersonal conflict within each disputing party. The inner conflict may be evidenced by confusion, inconsistency, or a lack of congruity. In conflict, there are varied perspectives and belief systems and values and interest. We talk about that. There could be multiple barriers to why we can't resolve conflict. First of all, most conflict is a product of lack of communication or poor communication or too much communication of the wrong kind. But it's typically based upon communication. And so what do you think would be typical barriers to communication? What kinds of things would be barriers to communication? Byron, what would be a barrier to communication?
Well, basically, not paying attention or doing other things while someone's talking to you, sketching, drawing.
Okay, so being inattentive, and if you're doing other things besides being inattentive, then you're clearly not listening or you're not paying attention. At the minimum, you're not being a participative listener. Okay. Somebody said earlier about culture. How could culture be a barrier to communication? Different beliefs, different belief systems. Language would be a clear barrier to communication. One of the, you talk about an opportunity. How many folks in here are bilingual? Bilingual? We have 2, 3, 4 people. I'm barely fluent in English, but we have. If you're bilingual, for example, there are multiple opportunities. Let's talk about in Texas. We have a very large Hispanic population. And there's been 2 occasions where I've been asked to mediate an issue where one of the parties was non-English speaking. And so I was fortunate enough to have had students that I trained that spoke Spanish, and so they didn't act in the role of a mediator, but they acted in the role of an interpreter. One I did as for the city of Dallas. Another one I did in another private role. But the issue is, and it always amazed me, is that because I wanted to make sure that the people said exactly the way that I said it, in the tone of voice and the words that I used. And obviously in different languages that's not going to work, because I would say to my translator, you know, I want you to tell them this. And I would say maybe 5 or 6 words. And then they're bloop, 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 you know. They talk on and on and on, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I only said like 5 words. Or the converse to that, I might say 3 or 4 sentences, and then they just go bloop. And then the other side talks back, and then, but you really feel at a loss because you really don't know what the other side's saying, although you can read body language and you can see how they're responding via the body language. And so that's always been an issue that I've had is being able to do mediations in other languages. Both of those mediations resolved. And I hope it's because I had people that had gone through my course as the translator in those instances. So they knew maybe not to use the exact same words because many of our words don't translate over very well, but at least they knew the intent of what I was trying to do in those conflict situations. But barriers to conflict, age and background is a very big barrier. For example, my youngest daughter, they got married to what's his name. She at her wedding, the entire wedding party up there, you know, I think the largest size was like a size 1, you know. And for you guys who don't know what that is, that's like a waist like this, I think. But anyway, they were like size 0s and 1s, and so the whole wedding party up there didn't weigh 300 pounds, and there were like 6 girls in the wedding party, you know. And my son, at the time 17 years old, and his first cousin, also 17-year-old, they're sitting there checking out the wedding party, and they say, "Boy, those girls look fat." And I looked over at them, and I thought, well, you know, they both have 20/20 vision, and I looked over at the punch bowl, make sure they hadn't been dipping into that, and I said, "Are you guys crazy? Those girls are fat?" And they said, "Yeah, Uncle Gary, you know, pretty hot and tempting." And so, you know, that was a cultural thing. And so now, you know, when people look at me and they say I'm fat, then I know what they're talking about. So cultural, age differences, those could all clearly be barriers to communication. And so we want to make sure that on a communication level, that we're all starting off on the same plane, that we're at the same level. Okay, any questions about what might be barriers to communication? Because when you're meeting with these people and you're finding out what their problem is or what their issue is, I can almost guarantee you it will boil back to some type of communication error. It'll boil back to some lack of miscommunication or too much of the wrong kind of communication. When we talk about the conflict resolution processes, we talk about the first part of any conflict is the combat or the actual disagreement that goes on. Then the next part is the problem solving, and then we have the stages of human conflict resolution process, which is the occurrence, the emotional phase, the conclusions phase, the solutions phase, and lastly the resolution phase. And we're going to break down each one of those resolution phases in the next few chapters.